Hello and welcome. I'm James Milan. In just a couple of weeks' time, on Tuesday, June 14th, Arlingtonians are going to go to the polls in a special town election around three separate debt exclusion questions. That's asking Arlingtonians to add to the existing tax burden outside of Proposition 2.5 in order to fund several different projects, all related to the growing enrollment in our schools or all related to our school system. We are here today with various members of Build Arlington's Future, and they are going to be both helping us work our way through the questions and the implications, and providing their own perspective on what the answers to those questions should be. Joining me in the studio right now is Dan Dunn, representing Build Arlington's Future, but of course Dan is also a sitting selectman in town. Dan, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And talking to us today. So we are here to talk about question 3 on the ballot, which has to do with the Minuteman rebuild or renovation, depending on what that is. So question 3 asks Arlington voters to agree to pay our town's share of the bond that would be required for that project. Through the work that we all know you have done personally over these last several years, nobody knows more about all the ins and outs of this than you do. So please briefly explain, why should Arlingtonians, vote yes on question 3, which involves taking on a significant added tax burden, estimated to be $32, $33, $34 million perhaps.
32 million, and actually even hopefully less, depending upon how much out-of-district students pay. But 32 is the number that we put forward on the ballot. So, or not on the ballot, but as a part of our motion to put it forward. Why should we do this building project? Minuteman, the building is more than 40 years old. It's falling apart. It is the school is under warning from the accreditation board simply because of the physical plant. The educational programs are excellent, but the physical building is failing. And so if we don't do something about the building, the school will lose its accreditation. And I guess there's a second question which some people ask, which is why are we doing vocational education in general? And that one is definitely a bigger question. And the short answer is because it's state law. But actually, that isn't why I think we should be doing it. I think we should be doing vocational education because it is the right thing for a set of people. Some students love Arlington High School, and some students, Arlington High School isn't the right fit for them. And whether it's because they learn by doing, or whether it's because they want a more hands-on education, or whether it's simply because they want to enter the workforce earlier, vocational education is something that's been an option in Arlington for these 40-plus years. And between 115 and 175 students every year go to Minuteman from Arlington to learn a trade or a technical education.
Well, on that point, in fact, critics of this project, or at least as it's currently construed, have pointed out that there is already a significantly higher cost per pupil for sending the Arlington students that we do to Minuteman than within the Arlington public school system, and that is likely to go up quite dramatically as well in the wake of if this question is passed. So what do you say to those critics?
I do. It's vocational education is more expensive than traditional education. There's simply no way around it. It is true. Some of the labs and some of the space requirements and some of the mechanical needs mean that it is going to be more expensive. It's also worth pointing out that Minuteman does things like more than half the students who go to Minuteman are on a special education IEP, and those special education plans end up being more expensive. I think that sometimes some of the opponents or people who are concerned about vocational education end up comparing some apples to oranges. So they say, Minuteman costs $25,000 or $27,000 per student to educate, and that capital cost is going to put another $10,000 on top of it. And it's true, but at the same time, no one ever compares. Like, when you look at the cost per capita and all the state numbers, the capital is always excluded, and it's simply because the capital is always framed differently. So I think that the short answer is that yes, vocational education is more expensive, but it is still the right education for the exact same reason that we provide special education for students when it's more expensive, or if you have particular needs that are more expensive, we provide them. We're here to educate the kids, not to find the cheapest education and deliver it to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Arlington residents may well be familiar with the fact that there are 16 schools within, or have been 16 schools over the course of history. I'm sorry, towns
yep.
within the Minuteman district, 16 towns. And that a vote to approve was at town meeting, or whatever the local government structure is in all those towns, was approved by all the towns except for Belmont. Belmont's town meeting turned this down. What are the implications of that for Arlington and for this vote?
Yeah, so if Belmont's vote ends up being the last word from Belmont, it does mean that this particular building project is dead. But I don't think that that's true. It's not the last word. There's still a lot of there's still a few innings to be played, I'd say, in this game. And I say that because it's a fun analogy, but it, of course, actually isn't a game. The state the Mass School Building Authority has given an extension to Minuteman to find funding for the school through the end of November. And if you look at the course of how Arlington came around to saying yes in this building, a lot of people were skeptical about it in the beginning, including people from the Finance Committee, the chair of the Finance Committee, Al Tosti, other members of the Finance Committee, including John Deist. And the things that brought them around were the more that they learned about what the alternatives were to rebuilding at Minuteman. And the more you learn about it and the more you see what the options are, the more you realize that the one that we're looking at really is the best one. And so I'm hopeful by putting a little bit more time on the clock that we're going to spend more time with Belmont. We're going to get Belmont to yes as well. Because I think that once they realize how expensive the renovation option is and how little you get for it, that they're going to reach the same conclusion that both the Arlington Minuteman Task Force did, the Board of Selectmen did, the Finance Committee did, Town Meeting did, and hopefully on June 14th, the voters will.
Okay. In doing our research in preparation for these interviews, we've heard different opinions on a very fundamental question, and that is whether our own town meeting's vote to approve of the Minuteman project is contingent on voters voting yes on question 3 on June 14th, whether it is contingent on that or not. So can you tell us, are we already on the hook for whatever Arlington's share is by our town meeting vote, or not?
We are not on the hook. And the reason we're not on the hook is that when the bonds are actually issued, when you get down into the nitty-gritty of who actually signs the bonds and sells them to the people who buy the bonds, they rely on, there's a title which is Bond Counsel. Bond Counsel has said if Arlington votes no on June 14th, these bonds will not be issued. And on this type of thing, his word is law. So no, we are not on the hook. June 14th is the day that will decide.
Okay, so a no vote, just to be perfectly clear, a no vote from Arlington voters on the 14th would cancel any obligation that we
It would cancel the obligation, and it would effectively kill the project. If Arlington is the largest part of Minuteman. It is we're sending a little bit more than a third of the in-district students. We're the biggest player. We're really the heart of that organization, and if we say no, then it's not going to happen.
Okay. Dan, as previously noted, for much of its history, the Minuteman district has been composed of 16 towns, but recent votes have reduced that just to 10 towns now operating within the Minuteman district. How are we going to get to those figures cited by Build Arlington's Future and other proponents of the Minuteman project? How are we going to get to those enrollment figures now that we're dealing with even fewer towns, and there's no sense that Watertown, Waltham, et cetera, are necessarily going to be signing on?
Minuteman gets its students from two sources. Basically, we call them in-district students and out-of-district students. And the 16 towns of Minuteman send 350, 400, 450, depending upon 500, depending upon the years. It has ranged over the years. It's definitely lower than it has been. Those are the in-district students. The out-of-district students come from a variety of towns. There's what they call the Big Three, which are Watertown, Waltham, and Medford. And then the list goes on. There's a long tail of how you fill them out. And so when one of the things taking a step back, one of the things that Arlington was very frustrated with Minuteman over the last many years is that we had 1/16 of the vote, even though we were sending 1/3 of the students. And the out-of-district students weren't paying their fair share within the school. And so that's actually why, if you look at votes of town meeting as recently as 3 years ago, we were actually opposed to the building progress as it was until we got a new regional agreement. And in that regional agreement, Arlington now has closer to a quarter of the vote. It's a weighted vote at the school committee. The out-of-district students are now required by the state to pay a capital cost for an approved building. And so we've really resolved a bunch of the problems that existed in the Minuteman district. And part of the price of doing that resolution was that some of the smaller towns were looking at the bills they were going to have to pay, and they chose to leave the district. A bunch of those smaller towns are going to keep sending their kids back as out-of-district students. And so I think some people get concerned about what fraction of the students in Minuteman are going to be in district or out of district. But what really matters at the end is, are the seats full? Because if the seats are full, then the bills will be paid. And when you look at the long range the enrollment, Minuteman has always had more than 700 students. And this building we're talking about building is 628. It's a downsized school from what exists right now. And so I'm really not worried about the fact that no one can see into the future. But so 30 years from now, are we going to have 700 students? I think so. But no one can actually say for sure that that's going to be true, or it'll be any less. Yeah.
But given the fact that, as you've just said, that we will continue to be dependent, or Minuteman will continue to be dependent on out-of-district students in addition to in-district students, and now the cost per student for out-of-district students is going to go up considerably for those towns if they're taking on capital costs. Will that not have an effect on the decision-making in those towns?
I think it definitely will. But in the end, all those towns are required by state law to provide a vocational education. And if that student says, I want a program, and the only available program is at Minuteman, they're going to go to Minuteman, and that school is still going to, that town is going to have to pay, even if it is more than it was used to being paid in the past.
Well, thanks very much for coming in and sharing your perspective with us, and obviously providing a lot of useful information for the voters.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. For Dan Dunn and Build Arlington's Future, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us. We've had a chance to speak to several members of the group Build Arlington's Future, who are all proponents of the debt exclusion questions, or proponents of saying yes. Not everybody is in favor of all of those questions. In fact, there's another group, Yes Yes No, who by the nature of that title, you can tell, are supportive of the first two questions, but not of question 3 related to the Minuteman project. We are lucky to have in our studio Charlie Foskett, eminent member of our Finance Committee for many long years now, who is one of the primary members of the group Yes Yes No, to provide their perspective on this question facing Arlington voters on June 14th. Charlie, thanks very much.
James, nice to be here. Thank you
for coming in to talk to us about this. So let's just get right to it. Obviously, Yes Yes No is a group not in favor of a yes vote on the 14th to the Minuteman project. Why?
James, before I answer that question, let me first mention that I'm representing myself and Yes Yes No, and not the Finance Committee. It's a Finance Committee actually voted 10-8 to support all 3 items.
Thanks for that clarification.
So the issue is really one of cost, and also good governance at Minuteman. If you look at the capital cost that this project is going to entail, and the benefits, the number of students that it benefits, we're really dealing with something that's completely out of proportion. You probably know that Minuteman is the most expensive vocational educational school in the state. And the educational cost in 2014 per student was $26,000, operating cost. As a comparison, Arlington is $13,000, and even Shawsheen Technical College, $17,000. So we could be $9,000 or $10,000 lower in our cost of educating these students if we had our students going to Shawsheen, for example. So getting back to the cost of this project to Arlington is going to be $10,000 of capital expense per student. We had 120 students last year, and the minimum cost is going to be $1.2 million. So that's roughly 120 students this year. So that's roughly $10,000 per student.
And you mean 1.2 million per year?
Per year, capital cost. Okay,
That's
to
how
service the capital, to service the debt. And
Excuse me, I just want to clarify, and that's on the basis of the 32 or 33 million dollar obligation that has been cited.
yes, yes. Under the best of circumstances, Arlington's share is going to be about 35% of that $33 million. And a basic problem is that the enrollment at Minuteman has been declining. You know that 6 towns are leaving the district. So this year, on October 1st of 2015, there were 390 students from the member towns at Minuteman. After the 10 towns leave, that number drops to 335. So the fewer towns besides Arlington that are in there, the higher the proportion of the cost that we have to bear. And under certain circumstances that were presented by the Minuteman school district management, that cost could rise as high as $1.7 million or maybe even $2 million a year. So it's about cost and it's about fairness. It's not fair to the citizens of Arlington. It's not fair to the students who go to Arlington schools to have these resources drawn away for essentially a Cadillac building. And for that reason, the Yes Yes No committee is opposing this article.
Okay, so just to follow up on a couple of things you said, you just mentioned a Cadillac building. Does that mean that Yes Yes No, or at least, I'll just ask for your opinion about this, that you would be more inclined to support a different project, a rebuild of some sort, but not going for all of the bells and whistles that you referred to as a Cadillac building? Or
let me just say that first of all, we have a new regional agreement now, and Arlington has a bigger voice in the community. In past years, there were 16 towns. We had 1 vote. It's now weighted so that we and a couple of other larger towns will have more influence on outcomes. I think the alternative costs that they presented have been have fluff in it. Okay, and it's argued by the proponents that it's going to cost us $100 million if we don't go with the proposal with the
existing
MSBA
project.
Yeah, the existing project, and I've seen numbers from Minuteman a couple of years ago that were in the $50 to $60 million range. This is a building that has lots of space, and there's no reason why it can't be renovated and provided with good programmatic changes. I mean, the Arlington Advocate commentary by Selectman Dunn, he started out and says that the roof leaks. So therefore, the implication is the roof leaks, we have to tear the building down. Who has a house where the roof leaks that you don't replace the roof, not tear the building down? And, you know, we have a history in Arlington of sound renovations and good programmatic changes. For example, we did the Hardy School, we did the Bishop School, and we did there's a third school that we completely renovated, okay? And we have 2 of the 3 fire stations, historic buildings. We've rebuilt, modernized, changed to modern code, new programs, handicapped accessible. And we're doing the same thing with the police station. So the idea of doing a successful, cost-effective renovation that can be good, programmed well for the students at Minuteman in the 21st century is certainly not an impossibility. In fact, it's very practical.
So again, I just want to make sure I have this right, that the primary objection that Yes Yes No has to the Minuteman project is the project itself as currently configured, not the need for renovations and changes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is support for that, but just not.
This is a school that was built for 1,100 kids, right? So they now have 600, 700 there, and they're going to probably have less going forward. Okay, there's plenty of space to renovate that building over time and put new modern program changes in there, you know, without having a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned a couple of times that it's a question of cost, and there's a couple of things that I think the proponents have to say in response to that. One of which is that vocational education itself is per se more expensive than regular education, let's say. And nonetheless, there's a real need for it in terms of quality of life. And in addition to that, there's an obligation to provide such education for students. So given those two things, is it proper, do you think, to measure the worth or not of this project solely on the basis of dollars and cents?
I don't think I'm measuring the project solely on the basis of dollars and cents, but I'd say it's principally about cost, okay? And let me go back to my comment. This is the most expensive regional vocational school in the state. Shawshene Valley Voc Tech, which for many years was run by our former selectman, Charlie Lyons, has an operating cost of $17,000 a year. This year, per student. This year, Arlington student cost at Minuteman is going to be $30,000. If you take $10,000 or more dollars on top of that, that means we're spending $40,000 a student. I'm not saying that vocational education isn't more expensive. I'm saying we don't have to have the most expensive school in the state. This is a question of management. It's a question of fiscal responsibility. We can give our students a good education for a lot less money.
And you've mentioned Shawshene a couple of times. Is that a viable option, do you think, in terms of sending Arlington students possibly there were this whole project to fall by the wayside?
Well, it's a complicated question, and I would say that it certainly would be possible under some circumstances, but I'm not recommending those circumstances.
Okay.
I'm using that as an example. And it's a school that's only 15 minutes further away. It's treating, a population of several towns, and it's providing good education, good technical vocational education for a lot less money.
Mm-hmm. And just last line of inquiry, you had mentioned that, or you alluded to the fact that we're all aware of, that the Minuteman agreement has recently been changed and that 6 towns have opted out. Yes. Moving forward, and that leaves the 10 remaining towns, potentially Waltham, Watertown, Medford, perhaps others might be enticed to join there. On kind of tracing that out, Selectman Dunn and other proponents have kind of mentioned figures in terms of meeting the new enrollment goals of the school, which they put at around between 600 and 700, from what I understand, as being entirely viable. What's your response to those prognostications?
Well, I think it's purely hypothetical as to whether Watertown or Waltham or Medford would join the school district. There are a lot of barriers there. I don't know if you've seen the recent article in Boston Magazine where the superintendent of Medford, I think it was, basically said, no way, no how, okay? And so, I mean, it's possible to get those schools to come in, but it's also possible to build another school in Arlington, and I can come up with all sorts of other alternatives. It's a pure hypothetical. I think we have to deal with the member towns that we have and the hope that we'll be bringing in some out-of-district students. After the 6 towns leave, there are 10 towns remaining. The 9 towns, besides Arlington, have had a 22% decline in their enrollment since 2005. Arlington's had a 13% decline in enrollment since 2005. So the trend is the enrollment's going down. It's not, if we're going to meet the target that the Minuteman management has stated for member towns enrollment when this new project is supposed to be complete, we're going to have a 36, 37% increase in member town attendance. And there's no history that shows that that's even possible. In addition, they're looking for 170 out-of-district students who pay tuition. So they will have to pay $17,000 in tuition, and I'll come back to that. But in addition, they're going to have to pay an $8,500 a year capital charge in principal, okay?
To help pay for
this project. Now, from my view, I'm not an economist, but when prices go up, purchases go down. Okay, so I think there'll be less of a tendency for Waltham or Medford or other schools to be sending children to the Minuteman when you increase the price by 30% or something like that. In addition, the state has recently made a change in the law that more or less pushes towns that have other options to not send freshmen to out-of-district schools. So the problem is this is not just a financial statement, it's also a social problem, because how many sophomores in high school do you know that want to leave their friends after their freshman year and go to another school? I think that's going to be a really small number. So the state has put up a barrier to prevent out-of-district migration that Minuteman's going to have to deal with, and that's going to depress the number of out-of-district students. So, I mean, not only is this cost high to begin with, but I think it's going to get higher for Arlington because enrollment is going to go down, and that's not going to favor Arlington's cost structure.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to invite you, if there is something that you feel needs to be addressed and we have not yet done so, I invite you to comment on that.
Well, I would like to mention that we have a website, www.yesyesno.org, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in seeing a lot of the details behind this analysis to look at it. And I guess I would like to say that I think personally that we should wait until after the new regional agreement has had a chance to settle in, when we have an opportunity to have more influence over the direction and the management of the district, to determine exactly how to move forward, to find out what indeed is the population trend going to tell us, and then do we want to rebuild that school? Do we want to build a new, smaller school? I don't think we want to build a school for 650 students on the idea that if we build it, they will come, because that hasn't been demonstrated to be the case in the past.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
You're very
coming
welcome,
in
James.
to talk with us today. We appreciate Charlie Foskett taking the time to come in and talk to us on behalf of Yes, Yes, No, and provide the fullest possible perspective, we hope, for you in dealing with question 3 and the other questions on the ballot on Tuesday, June 14th. So on behalf of Charlie Foskett and for Arlington Public News and Arlington Community Media, I'm James Milan. Thanks for joining us.